Welcome to my latest open source project called Visualize Logs. I like to visualize different aspects in cybersecurity, and most of them relate to logs. So I thought I'd write a project that hopefully will be more log formats. Right now, it ingests Procmon CSV logs. So Procmon is a tool in Windows to view processes that start, file activity, registry activity, network activity, and it puts it in a nice textual output, as you see here on the left side of my screen. Whole bunch of information. It's really, really, really long, even for the very short captures. And if you were to go through this by hand, looking at all these different registry keys and so forth, you quickly get lost. So it is my goal to make this visual so you can get more information faster. There's two projects out there that are similar to this. I They were inspiration. I didn't necessarily go in and dig in their internals, but there were different pieces that I liked. Like ProcDot, for instance, we'll take Procmon output and put it into a graph. You'll see the graph looks a lot different than the one that I wrote, but they both can be used for the same goal. And one I don't think is meant to replace another. It's just a different type of view. Norbin captures Procmon data really well, so I was impressed with that. So I used that in my mindset. I'm going forth and making this tool on my own. So my goals: I want to move into visualization. I want to make it interactive. You'll see my output is actually all interactive. It's not just static images, although you can pop out static images if you're interested in that. I wanted to leave it open for more logs, so not just be Procmon. I wanted to leave it open so if I come up with Windows event logs or something like that, I can go ahead and add it to the same project and have it just accept a new type of log. And I reused a number of things from my previous projects, like making modules, uploading it to PyPy, making documentation, and all that. So when I started this project from scratch, I added all those portions just like I did on my previous projects. So here's my project page, and my README got to be so long that I actually made a table of contents. We'll come back to the gallery. You're going to see Procmon CSV logs. Right now, that's all this supports. In the future, maybe even the next cycle, I'll add in new log types. So we'll go to requirements, and the requirements are pretty minimal. I programmed this in Python version 3. Should work in version 2. I've tested it on Mac and Windows 7, so it should work pretty much anywhere. You just have to have GraphViz installed, and it has to be in your path. And if you do it on a Mac, you actually want this command line, because without the GTS, you don't get the plotting, you don't get the coordinates back that you would with the Windows version. To install my project, you just do a pip install visual logs. If you don't want to use the library as a library, I actually wrote a command line tool called Procmon CSV, and you can see it's completely configurable with all these options. You can turn certain things, labels on, labels off. You can plot certain things, not plot the other things. And if you want to test this, I actually gave you some sample data, so you didn't have to build a malware box and run some malware and capture it with Procmon. I actually gave you two cover examples and a adware from www.lgoogle.com, because a lot of times people miss the dot in there. And if you do have adware, and I'll show you what that looks like. And probably my favorite plots, and the ones I'll show you here, it's going to be of the ransomware. And I forgot what strain I picked, but it's something that you can get off of VirusTotal. I have complete documentation like before. And if you go to the documentation, you can also get to my gallery through here. I give you all the SHAs and where they link. Since I have 10 minutes, I can't really go through all these things in 10 minutes. I just want to get into some galleries and show you. So since the ransomware is my favorite, I'll click on example 1. So in example 1, all I did was plot the processes, and this is made from the data that you see on the left hand side here. It goes through the CSV and actually builds out a network graph and then graphs it. And this is, it's pretty thin. You don't really need to zoom in or anything, but let's say you were interested in a particular, let's say this PID. As you see, I put my cursor over it, it actually pops up more information about that process. And you can see this PID creates that PID, which creates that PID, which creates that PID and that PID, which creates that PID, and so forth. So a bunch of processes being spawned. And if you are interested in a certain part of the graph, you can actually drag like that, and it zooms in. If you want to go back out, you just double click. And all the Plotly controls, Plotly is what I used. It's a framework for using different types of plots. Plotly controls are up here. So if you wanted to export this as an image, you could actually click on that, export as an image. But this is pretty thin. Let's look at some other examples. So that was one if I just focused on the ransomware using ProcMom. Now the next example, this is if we look at every process. And you can see there's a whole bunch more going on in this trace that if we were to focus with ProcMom, we'd actually miss. And again, you can zoom in like we talked about earlier. So let's look at network connections. So this is processes and network connections, and this is where the graphs get really cool. You can see there's stuff going on the system, but these processes, and watch this, we can zoom in. This process here connects to this host using all these different connections, and each one of these you can float over and see information about the different connections. Some are UDP connections. Actually, they're all UDP for this trace. If you had TCP, there'd also be other TCP connections. And there's only going to be one host, so if you see dependency between processes, like this process went to this host, it's all a network graph now, so it's really easy to visualize. And double-clicking zooms me back out. So let's look at file writes, renames, and deletes. This is where you can really tell this is ransomware. Boom. This process, I'm only looking at writes, deletes, and renames, and you can see it writes, deletes, or renames a ton of files. Ransomware really shows up well in these type of plots because you can see just tons and tons of files that it touches, and each one of these is a unique file. It's not, it's this dot will not be the same file as this dot because it's a network graph. And we can do the same thing for looking at registry. So here's the registry activity for these different PIDs. And you can see, for instance, this registry here is something this PID depends on, but it's also connected to this PID, and it's the same registry key or value that it's going to. And let's see if I can fit in a couple more examples. Let me jump right into the adware file activity. So here's the adware file activity. You can see it does look as busy as a ransomware, but that's just because it's installing a ton of stuff. And you can see over here it installs a ton of stuff. And I'll let you play around on your own, hovering over the values to see what's there. Covter is pretty interesting. If you're not familiar with that, it's a piece of malware that provides fileless persistence and does that by writing to the registry. And I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to be able to go through every example here. But you'll see if you just look at the process itself, it's pretty boring. But once you start looking at processes around it, you actually start figuring out more. So my actual Covter executable is right here. You can see I ran it. It doesn't really do anything else. But if you weren't looking at every process on the system, you'd miss the fact that PowerShell was started. And you can see the command right there. And that's a very well-known Covter command. It starts up Mishta, which is a shell interpreter. And there's the information, and you can see the actual shell in there. And it just continues on, and it modifies your registry and so forth. And I believe I do have a registry writes and deletes in here. So you can see here, and then you can just take a look at the registry. If you want to look at a certain part, you just zoom in, or you zoom back out. So that's really it for my project. Sorry, it's hard to fit 2+ weeks of straight work on this project into 10 minutes of video, but hopefully you got a good flavor of it. Code is really long. I think I was up to 2,000 lines just to support this file type, but it was a heck of a lot of fun, and it's actually useful, and hopefully you enjoy it. Look forward to your comments and questions, and I'll see you on the forums.